Welcome to Frontline Dispatches on Organizing Upgrade. Every other Wednesday, we're here where we talk to left organizers and thought leaders about their strategies and stories about the struggles for racial and economic justice. My name is Geraldine Wan. I'm your host today. If you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, please leave your comments and questions in the chat, and we'll be monitoring that as we go along. Let's get started. My guest today is Tamara Anderson, an education justice organizer in Philadelphia. She is one of the organizers for the Zen Education Project, which is coordinated by Rethinking Schools and Teaching for Change. Tamara is a founding member of the Black Lives Matter at School and Philly Black Lives Matter Week at Schools. She is also the national organizer for the Teach Truth campaign. Welcome to Frontline Dispatches, Tamara.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good to be with you. So I'm following up on an article you wrote in August for Organizing Upgrade titled #TeachTruth, Pushing Back on Attacks on CRT. By way of background for our viewers, the right wing has launched a coordinated effort to erase the history of Black people and other people of color in the curriculum for K through 12. Over a 4-year period, Fox News mentioned CRT over 1,300 times. And their tactic has been to label racial justice curriculum as critical race theory and to call it out as a Marxist plot to demonize white people. We know that in 27 Republican-controlled state legislatures have either passed legislation or have pending legislation to ban the teaching of racial justice issues. You are one of the main organizers of the pushback against this legislation and this movement. And you've organized a national campaign to resist the censoring of the truth in schools. Talk about what the right-wing strategy is and how it's unfolding, and tell us what is CRT and why did the right choose to make it its target?
So first, to talk about why they have used this buzzword as their campaign or their thing to stand on. So one strategy that we have seen time and time again is just how much space they take up on social media. Like when you mentioned 1,300 times is mentioned, even if the definition of critical race theory is incorrect, it is said they have like so much time on the air. Like one of the strategies that we have tried to use with that Teach Truth campaign was to take back some of that time, right? Take back some of that time and fill it with stories from educators, fill it with stories from students, fill it with stories from parents who are like, these are the types of things I would like my child to learn, or these are the authentic histories that I get excited about or that I don't know about, or this is how old I was when I learned these types of things. Okay. So critical race theory within itself is simply it is a term coined by Derek Bell, and basically in the term itself, it is a lens to look at how systems work, systemic racism, like how's racism and how these things intersect, and mostly like the overlying thing of white supremacy. And it's definitely very much related to court cases. So you hear a lot of the pushback saying, well, K through 12 teachers don't even teach critical race theory. These are things we hear in higher ed or in legal. But I would dare say if my students in K through 12 have no idea what the 14th Amendment is, which is a part of that whole centerpiece, then, and I do teach them that, and I teach them how it is relevant in many court cases, including Title VII cases, or how schools use it, then I am teaching, I'm teaching through a lens of critical race theory, right? So I think it's really important, like, to state that fact, and to also say that we've seen this before, like this type of vitriol, was seen, this is why we don't teach about Reconstruction. We teach Reconstruction as if it was a failure, as opposed to it being America being her best self, right? And in response to her being her best self, Black codes, Jim Crow, all these things come. white terrorism comes up to basically rile up. So the fact that you're seeing a version of that now with laws being passed and people running on it in school board elections, like we're seeing it across the country in school board elections, things like that is just another way of silencing this idea of, I don't want my kid to feel like they're racist. I don't want my kids to feel bad. But the last time I checked, you should want all children to know the truth about where they're from and the country they are part of, the good, bad, and the ugly. I mean, this is how we move forward and actually make change, because we're starting from that.
So this is a way to sanitize American history and to create the myth of America in a way to silence racial justice advocates.
Yeah.
So talk about the Zen Education Project and Black Lives Matter in school and what you're trying to do in this National Teach Truth campaign. I know you've called on teachers to defy the laws that have been passed and to teach the truth. Talk about who's in your coalition and what your strategies and tactics are.
So in the beginning, so we started in June, we started to see like this push of laws and bills that were being passed, especially even among, we have members of Black Lives Matter School who are educators in Iowa, where these things are being done, Iowa and Wisconsin. And so one of the things that was really important was to basically give teachers, educators, this toolkit. So what we did is we made a call out to say, hey, if you're an educator and you have a historical monument around you that would not be taught if these bills were to pass, or if these bills have already passed and you want to build coalition with those around you who are trying to push back against this, this is your moment. So we did a weekend of action, August 27th to 29th. And in this weekend of action, over 100 cities, locations participated, whether it was with 1 to 2 teachers or whether it was large groups. Some of them were intergenerational with students and parents. Some of them, like here in Philly, we had a teach-in at the President's House exhibit, which within itself was the product of a fight. When the President's House was first unearthed as an archaeological find in Philadelphia, the National Park Service was going back and forth of what story they wanted to tell about this house. And one of the stories that was being erased or being eliminated was the story of the enslaved that lived in that house. And so a local organization, led by Michael Cord, which is an attorney here in Philadelphia and a historian, basically fought that whole idea and got this. So now you have this wonderful exhibit that like highlights and centers around the stories of the enslaved that stay there, which is very powerful. And so I thought that what we started to see is, we also had a Teach Truth Instagram social media challenge to really like take over social media with stories about, this is why authentic history is important. This is why we need to see this. And that power, basically then, there were op-eds that were written across the country too. And then we also expanded the partnership with African American Policy Forum. The partnership then expanded to include the National Education Association. The partnership included NYC Metro, just to name like a few of the people that endorsed Alliance for Quality Education, American Civil Liberties Union, Haymarket Books, the Kapoor Center, California Teachers Association. So we had all these, Chicago Teachers Union. So we had all of these organizations and labor unions that supported the work between August. And then that led directly, naturally, to us building even a larger coalition around the Teach Truth National Day of Action that was sponsored by BLM, partnership with BLM in School and African American Policy Forum, that then included even more sponsors, that happened on October 14th.
So talk about the response to that National Day of Action on October 14th and some concrete examples of how teachers are responding to your call to teach truth. And I know some of the teachers have been threatened physically and been
Yeah.
threatened with being fired.
Mhm.
So how are you supporting them, and what's going on across the country?
So there is the teacher in Jacksonville, Florida, who got let go. We also were having like the Daily Beast, like make public lists of the teachers who signed the petition to pledge teach truth. They were making that public. And those locals where the laws had already passed were using that list as kind of a blacklist, like almost like a McCarthyism 1.2 type of thing. And so one way we support educators is we made it very public that, like, if you want your name removed as a result of this, we do that. But we also provided really on the ground support for each of the educators and their organizations. And that support came in, how they would advertise, how they would build coalitions. Like right now, Georgia actually had 2 events in 2 different locations. And that has resulted in now this weekend, they're having like a statewide Georgia coalition that they have built K through higher ed. So these are like many of the examples we're seeing is that teachers no longer feel isolated. Before this Teach Truth campaign happened, before October 14th happened, we were getting a lot of emails from educators who just felt like they were alone. And after they participated in the weekend and in October 14th, many of the comments we got back is it was really nice. Like many of them had no idea their parents supported them. So it was this idea of building these organic coalitions, but providing some sort of buffer for them to reach out to and talk about these different things. And then we also developed the Zen Education had a Teach Truth syllabus, which is still being shared, is still available on the website, and that's being used in schools. We have had, there's been several like either teach-ins or webinars that have been hosted and open and invited to many people. And of course, for BLM in school, October 14th was also our kickoff for the Year of Purpose. And the Year of Purpose came about last year when we as an organization decided, okay, we have this week of action we've been doing now for the last 3 years. We need to actually expand this, that these 13 guiding principles that pretty much are the pillars of our work, they should be expanded across the year. And so October 14th is George Floyd's birthday. We lifted him up, lifted his life up on that day, specifically in a virtual format. But then we are coming on to November for the Trans Day of Remembrance. So we always, we have, if you go to our website, you will see like curriculum and information for each of those months all the way throughout to Juneteenth, actually.
Okay. And that's through Black Lives Matters at school.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to turn to your personal story, if we can. And I'd like to know how you began this work. And I know you were a classroom teacher at one point. How did you come to understand that this type of work, organizing for education justice, needed to happen? And how did you get involved?
I think, it's so funny. When you look backwards, you're like, oh, I think I've always been doing it some kind of way. I remember being elected like class president 8th grade, and we couldn't, the trip that we wanted, we couldn't get. I like organized, got signatures, got pen, like this is where we gonna go. You know what I'm saying? So that happened. Then I went to, so if anybody knows anything about Chicago, there's 2 South Sides. There's the South Side where the Black people live, and the South Side where the white people live.
Yes.
And I went to a high school on the white South Side. And when I had, up from K through 8, I had been in Catholic schools that were like all Black, like Black nuns. I had no idea, honestly, that Catholics were that white until I went to high school. So I get to high school and it was like culture shock. I was like, what is happening? And so one of the first thing we did as a group of freshmen and sophomores is we asked about Black History Month. And it was the first time I had ever had school be like, what month? We don't celebrate that month. In the city? Like the whole city.
In
like
Black Chicago? Are you kidding me?
I was like, the Archdiocese has one of the largest Black history masses at Cathedral.
Yeah.
At that time, we had a Black bishop. I was like, what? So we gathered students together. We, fought to have this celebration, and it ended up being bigger and bigger every year. But I remember getting on the programs like, N-word, go back to Africa, like certain stuff. And we would take it to the people in charge, and they were like, well, what do you expect? And that lit a fire under me from that point on. Like, because I was making friends with white students who were eager to be a part of the conversation. But the adults were like, and then some of the students had very racist things to say. It was definitely an interesting thing. And I took that with me to college, and because I'm also an artist too by trade, you were always fighting for your space. And then when I took that into the classroom, even before I got to the classroom, I did a whole project in undergrad, an independent study with a group of K through third graders in a local housing project near my college. And I started a Girl Scout troop with them, and we had dance classes, and we did all this.
What college did you go to?
University of Illinois in Champaign, Urbana. So I'm in the middle of Popocock, Illinois, right? Yeah. And it was all these like beautiful young Black girls who had never even been to Chicago. So took them on trips and built these long-lasting relationships with them, and realized that this is like how you make change happen.
Yeah.
And then I took that when I became a classroom teacher. So in Chicago, I became a teacher.
What grades?
Middle school. I've always taught I've always taught this grade nobody wants to teach. I've always taught middle school. And in middle school, first I started at magnet school. And then I had a principal ask me, she's like, it's the second lowest school in the west side of Chicago. Don't go over there at night, but can you come and help me start this arts program there? Huh? Oh, okay. So get there. It was the best 5 years of my life. The kids, I had partnerships with the Joffrey Ballet, developed partnerships with Chicago Symphony Orchestra, Goodman Theater. The students even today still find me on Facebook and be like, I play Stevie Wonder for my kid because we danced to that, such and such. So having that long-term thing. And then that brought me to New York, where I worked really closely. So New York is really interesting because they have parent liaisons that are actually a part of the district, that are hired part of the district. And that was really exciting to me to work as a teacher with them and to have that type of thing. And then that brings me to Philadelphia, where I teach and start doing work with the Caucus of Working Educators, like started doing this whole progressive caucus work where I'm at UCOR, I'm around people, and we're talking about social justice and labor. But labor still goes back to my upbringing, because my mom was like the youngest president of her IEA local. And I had to go to every meeting with her. National Education Association. That's Illinois Education Association.
Okay.
So it all connects, right? Like my grandmother was the community organizer in our neighborhood. She was the pastor of the church, and she worked at the police department. So she could make you not get a ticket, fix your ticket, and show you about Jesus all the same time. So, but like, I think that by the time I got to Philly, and by the time at this time I'm becoming a parent, my daughter at this time in Philadelphia is 5 years old. She diagnosed with some speech issues. She needs IEP. Then I start branching really into like being an advocate for parents, especially those parents that have kids with special needs. And, and then that leads me directly into the opt-out movement in Philadelphia, where I was one of the parents opting out of the test. Yeah.
Opting out of those high stakes testing.
Philadelphia hit the map because we had probably the biggest amount of Black and brown parents that were opting out, because, we gave them a pathway that made sense. So you can't be like, oh, it's opt out, and you're not giving parents choices. Like, you have to have a different conversation about that when it comes to us. We do.
So thank you for that history. It sounds like it just comes naturally to you, that you're It comes from you being rooted in your family and your community. I appreciate that. I want to turn to what happened yesterday. We saw in Virginia, the gubernatorial election, one of the issues that the winning Republican Glenn Youngkin ran on was education reform, and he included the banning of CRT in schools, critical race theory.
Yeah.
How does your campaign to teach truth and to defy these unjust laws fit into the larger strategy to defeat authoritarianism and address the racial wedge issues in the electoral arena, particularly in the upcoming elections in 2022 and then again in 2024?
So it's interesting. So one of our partners for the Teach Truth campaign in August was Move Up, which is, you know, the organization that talks about voting rights and things like that. And I think that, yes, Zen Education Project is a K through 12 organization. We're working with K through 12 educators. We're trying to embolden them and embrace that. But I think the natural step that what's going to happen for all of us, especially as organizers, is to also give people information about policy. How do you participate in school board things? How do you get parents that will be on your side to be on school board committees? Because while this is happening, school board elections are happening. And also realizing that if this happened in Virginia, it's about to happen all over, especially with, you know, it being an election day yesterday. And the question is how prepared on the side of right, I like to say, how prepared on the side of right are we preparing the people on the ground to really push back? Mm-hmm. Like not just push back in the classroom, not just push back, you know, in their community organizations, but really push back in a really robust political campaign, right? How does that become an educational strategy, right? Where it's connected, because this is connected to voter suppression, right? You don't want to learn these things so that people can further decrease their understanding of civics, right? Which means that they further decrease their understanding of participation, and then they just follow anybody. But then there's also this idea that we can no longer put our face in the sand and say, oh, well, the right is so ridiculous, nobody will believe it. Because we did that already. And that's how we got 4 years of who we had. So right now we have to realize that there is a huge component of individuals who do believe in this. And also understand that what makes this time so scary is that after all the uprisings last year, the political right saw a very multi-ethnic force that was pushing against them, that was organizing these work in the streets. And so this CRT and anti-bias, this is like the response to last summer. Because you also, think about how many like white educators you have that are like, oh yeah, I'm not doing this. I want to teach the truth, right? I want to get correct curriculum. I want to educate myself. You know, like the Teaching for Black Lives study groups that are happening right now across the country. Those are like predominantly white educators who are sitting in these spaces to learn like what's next to do and what to bring to their classroom and dealing with their own personal bias and their own issues of like, how do they look at race and how do they look at race in their students, in their classrooms, and their communities.
Definitely, that's the truth. You know, I want to turn to hear your thoughts on the broader Black Lives Matter movement, which has sparked this national uprising and has called attention to structural racism and police murder. And if you could talk a little bit about what impact that has had on the work of the Zen Education Project and the Black Lives Matter at School Project. I know that the BLM at School movement came directly out of that call for actions against structural racism out of the Black Lives Matter movement. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, continuing the campaign with, so like right in 2018, we immediately had 2019, we immediately had 4 demands. And one of those demands was having more counselors and not cops, or defunding the police. Whereas you can just look back 4 or 5 years ago, if you said defund the police in any public space, you were going to lose your job and not be hired. And now it's becoming a conversation that people are having. And we also have, having the curriculum that's connected to that, but also really standing on the fact of this idea of what it doesn't mean to be an abolitionist educator. What does it mean to be, if you are non-Black, what does it mean to be a co-conspirator, like Dr. Bettina Love says? I mean, what does it mean to do that? Like, we are redefining roles of allyship. Mm-hmm. And redefining really what it means to be progressive. Because if you're not careful, progressive can look very much like liberal, and liberal can look very much like some horrible educational reform strategy. So you want to make sure, like, what we're doing is redefining, asking ourselves really clear questions about, if we are moving forward in these spaces, if we are doing these next steps, how does that change spaces for Black bodies, not only in the classroom, but also in their community, especially as we are seeing an increase in gun shootings in our community, and an increase of policing, but also this idea of, Proud Boys. It's like all these things are like popping up that are very much in the vein of like white terrorism and fear too.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yes. So what's next on the horizon for Black Lives Matter at School? I know you do. In February, you have the Black Lives Matter at School week every year throughout the country. What does that look like, and what else is going on?
So we have the Week of Action that starts January 31st and goes through February 4th. And then we have the Year of Purpose. Like I said, it started October 14th. And the next day for the Year of Purpose is, I get the date right now. I think it's November 14th, is the Trans Day of Remembrance.
Okay.
And
what is that about, the Trans Day of Remembrance?
So Trans Day of Remembrance is literally highlighting and uplifting trans lives. Last year, we uplifted the life of William A. Dorsey, who is the first trans person on, enslaved trans person, with images and pictures and what that life, means for trans people today. And also to honor the fact that trans women of color are still at a high risk of death due to murder and abuse, and to also highlight, like, what does that look like, and also what does it mean to have trans affirming principles and trans affirming trans affirming environment in our schools and our community.
So this is, you bring it into the classrooms.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. Tamara Anderson, appreciate you. Pleasure meeting you. Thank you for all the work you do and for this interview. I think that's all the time that we have, unfortunately.
Oh, thank you so much. I have fun.
All right. To our audience, if you've enjoyed the interview, stay up to speed with all of the content coming out of Organizing Upgrade. Sign up at our website to hear about upcoming events, videos, and articles about left strategy and organizers. Thank you for joining us.